Hi everybody, I hope you're all doing well. We are in week 7 now, which is almost to the midpoint of the semester. And this week we're going to be focusing on chapter 9, which is a bit shorter than the other chapters we've been going through. However, it falls at a good time because you do have your midterm next week, and also the first project is due at the end of this week. So basically it kind of gives you a little bit of extra time to be working on these other things. So if you haven't already started working on the project, it's definitely time to get going on that, as well as to start planning to study for the exam. So what I will do is mention a couple things at the end of this lecture with respect to both the exam and the project and all that. But in the meantime, let's go ahead and get started. One of the first types of fibers we are going to look at under the special use fibers are elastomeric fibers. And an elastomer is basically a natural or synthetic polymer that can be stretched repeatedly. So the best way to think about this is a rubber band. These fibers can be stretched to twice their length, and then they return to their original length. And so based on that, obviously they can be done with repetition. So the two main fibers that fall under this umbrella are rubber and spandex, so we're going to look at each of those individually. So the first type of elastomeric fiber we're going to look at is rubber. And obviously rubber is something you've had exposure to most of your life, but if you didn't know, there are actually two ways in which we get rubber. So rubber does naturally occur in the environment, and so what we do is take the latex from the rubber tree and coagulate it in order to make rubber as we know it and are able to use it that can be used in products. So I put the genus and species name of the tree there, but generally speaking, that particular plant is referred to as the rubber tree or the rubber plant. And that's the oldest elastomer, and believe it or not, the least expensive, has excellent elongation, and it's used in a lot of different products for which there's a need for that elongation property. Neoprene is the synthetic version of rubber, so if you've ever seen that on a garment tag or something like that before, it's basically the synthetic version of rubber. And that is resistant to oils, acids, and alcohols, so it's almost kind of invincible in a way. But both natural and synthetic rubbers are used to make things like tires. So you can see the need for rubber in extremely durable goods and a lot of commercial uses where rubber would come into play.
Next, we take a look at spandex. You can find these in your textile kit, numbers 40, 41, and 205. Spandex was the first manufactured elastic fiber. It's interesting because it was introduced in the 1950s to replace rubber, and if you'll recall from the last slide, rubber was introduced in the early 1900s, and both are used for similar purposes. Spandex is superior to rubber in terms of strength and durability, so it did have a lot of extra properties that made it more desirable than rubber. And you're probably familiar with spandex. You've seen it on many garments that you've worn. Interestingly, in other parts of the world, it's known as elastin. So if you see that in a garment from somewhere else, just know that it is exactly the same as spandex. Figure 9.1 on page 204 gives you a microscopic view of spandex. And then note that a lot of times people will say lycra in lieu of spandex, but they are not the same thing. Lycra is a brand name, and spandex is the generic name. So when you are referring to lycra, you're referring to a very specific brand of spandex versus spandex being just the generic for this elastomeric fiber.
So rubber and spandex are both used for, well, from the perspective of apparel, a lot of times they're used for more functional garments that get a little bit more wear and tear, so or just to need that stretch component to them. So a lot of workout clothes, for example, are made out of rubber, spandex, that sort of thing. Wetsuits and that type of stuff as well. You can also see from the knee brace that these fibers are used in functional components that are beyond just apparel as well. So the uses for the fibers are pretty broad. Here's a closer look at the properties of both spandex and rubber. And now you can really see what the idea was behind the development of spandex, which was basically to capitalize on the properties of rubber, which of course for both of them is excellent elongation and excellent elastic recovery like we've been talking about. So spandex being developed to sort of better what was already happening with the rubber and make for a better product that also had those properties. They managed to do it here. So you can see how under aesthetics and durability as well as comfort, spandex rates quite a bit higher in these properties. Rubber is generally pretty uncomfortable. Spandex is a bit more comfortable. I actually find it to be quite comfortable, but it gets only a moderate rating, generally speaking. So for our purposes, we'll go with that. But again, in looking at the two side by side like this, you can see where or why spandex was developed. In addition to the elastomeric fibers, we are going to talk really quickly about fibers that have chemical heat or fire resistance, which is basically the purposes for which these fibers are used. So aramid is the primary one that we're going to talk about here, and in your kit you can see an example of that under number 42. But aramid is actually a member of the polyamide family. It's basically a nylon that was developed specifically for heat and flame resistant properties. It was developed by DuPont. So you can kind of think of aramid as sort of a cousin of nylon in a way. So nylon is the generic name for it, but the trade names are Nomex, Kevlar, Conex, and Phenylon. So sometimes you might hear, I've actually heard it referred to as Kevlar sometimes, but nevertheless, those are the brand or trade names that sometimes aramid falls under. It's a bit too expensive for normal apparel and interior products, again, because it was developed for these specific purposes. So those being for use in protective clothing like firefighting garments and that sort of thing, technical garments and industrial products like lab gowns and whatnot. So this isn't something that you're going to see just in your normal everyday apparel and accessory store necessarily, but again, it does have some properties that make it great for use in technical industrial areas where the high cost of it can be justified.
Glass is a special fiber that is very fire resistant. In fact, it's incombustible, so that means it doesn't burn. It was used commercially for the first time in the 1920s, but it's actually been around for a very long time. The process of turning glass into fiber dates all the way back to the Phoenician time period. So it is a very, very old fiber. Traditionally, glass fibers are not used in apparel that we wear because when the fiber breaks, it creates these very small glass shards and can cause severe skin irritation. So today what you'll primarily see glass fibers being used for is home insulation. You know, that pink stuff that they put inside houses. Glass fibers are made from a combination of sand, silica, limestone, and then the additives of feldspar and boric acid. And if you want to see a microscopic view of glass, you can take a look at that on page 209, figures 9.7 and 9.8.
Finally, we're going to talk really quickly about metallic fibers, which are used primarily for decoration on garments. So for our purposes, that's primarily what we're focused on here. And back in the day, gold and silver was actually used for those trims. Nowadays, the gold and silver has been replaced by aluminum, obviously due to the cost factor. But there are two ways to make metallic fibers. They can either be made by laminating the aluminum between two layers of polyester film, or by vaporizing the aluminum under high pressure until it deposits on the polyester film. If you look in your textile kit under N37, you can see an example of a metallic yarn that has been metallized, so to speak, so that'll give you an example of that. But again, those are primarily used for decorative purposes and trims and that sort of thing. As a review, just to point out the major takeaways from this chapter, we went over the elastomeric fibers of rubber and spandex. So those are going to be the main focus of this particular chapter, but we also went other fibers that have other special uses, primarily that they are chemical heat or fire resistant. So we talked about aramide and glass and metallic fibers as well. So those are pretty much the main takeaways from this chapter.
Project 1 will be due this week. If you have not started on it, you really need to get going on this project. It will be uploaded to Canvas. All of the directions are in Canvas under assignments. You can submit it as a Word doc or a PDF. Please make sure that once you submit, you know that it is there and it's the correct document. I've had several students upload incorrect documents. I've even had students upload the syllabus by accident. So please check your work once you've submitted to make sure that number one, that it's submitted, and number two, that you've submitted the proper document. The reason why I say this is because no late work is accepted. So if there's a mistake there, it will not be counted. Make sure that you read the instructions and you complete the whole document. And if you have any questions, you can always send me an email or stop by my office hours for clarification that you may need. The other thing is that this first project is a tool for you to prepare for the upcoming exam, so you can use it to your advantage when you are taking the exam, as you can have all the tools that you'd like to have at the ready for taking the exam. So if you have any questions, make sure to contact me, and have a great week.
As I mentioned earlier in this lecture, it was great that this was a short chapter, because now's the time when you should really begin to start thinking about or start studying for the midterm exam. So at this point, I'd like to go over some of the logistics and information regarding the exam so that you have an idea of what it's going to be like and what to expect, so there aren't any surprises and you can better prepare yourself for the exam. So first off, again, from the syllabus, but the dates are here for the exam. It's going to be available starting on Monday at 8 a.m. and it will be available until Friday evening at 11:59 p.m. However, I do recommend not waiting until the last minute, just like for the project for this either, just in case you have some technical issues or problems, because I really can't help you when it's that close to when the exam is due and when it's midnight on a Friday night as well. So just don't wait till the last minute to get started on it. You can find the exam online under Canvas. It'll be under quizzes or exams. I think Canvas may call it quizzes, but it'll be there on Canvas. You will have 150 minutes to complete the exam, and that time starts when you first open up the exam, and it will run during that period. So you cannot stop and start. Once you start it, you have to finish it in one sitting. You can't stop it, come back to it hours or especially not days later. So plan a time to take it where you can allot that amount of time for the exam and you won't be interrupted. I would also recommend being in a quiet place where no one's around, so that way you can stay focused and you won't have any interruptions during that time. In terms of format, there will be 30 questions. They're 4 points each, so that's a total of 120 points. The questions are primarily multiple choice, so there might be some short answer in there, but at this point I'm thinking they're going to be primarily multiple choice questions. You can use your textbook, the lectures, notes, anything any of the content from this course, videos, whatever it might be, but the caveat being that you do have to take the exam independently, so you must be by yourself when you go to take this exam. These are the instructions that will show up on the screen when you go to select the exam or the quiz to take it. like I said, don't worry about whether it's called a quiz or an exam. Either way, it will say midterm there, so you'll know it's the one, and it's going to be the only one up there, so there shouldn't be any confusion there. But again, just remember that you can't have any multiple attempts. So don't hit the take the quiz button, that blue button at the bottom of the screen there. That'll be like the first screen that you see when you do select the exam. Don't hit it until you're ready, because if you do, your score will be a 0, and it'll just be, it's difficult to reassess everything, and there's no way I can tell whether or not you were actually taking the exam and already viewed the questions or not. So just don't press that button until you're ready, okay? And again, just make sure you've allotted the time to take it. So once you actually get into the exam and are ready to go forward with it, and you hit that take the quiz button, look for the best answer. There may be a couple of choices that you want to go with, but just make sure that you select the best answer based on what we've gone over in this class. And there'll be a circle next to each each response that you could mark. So just make sure that you mark only one of them. After you have answered everything, make sure to select or to click on the Submit Quiz button. This is how everything is saved and how I know you took it and you completed it. Otherwise, you will end up with just a 0. So in addition to marking all of your answers at the very end of it, you do have to submit the quiz. If you have any trouble with the exam, either prior to it or when you're in it, email me immediately. Certainly after the exam is due, I can't help you at all, and towards the end of it, when all the students are taking it, I can't really assist at that point either. So again, that's why I recommend taking it early and just making sure that you allot yourself enough time. However, if you do have trouble, I will be frequently checking email during that availability period, so I can respond to you pretty quickly and hopefully help you work out whatever the issue may be. But anyway, nevertheless, just again, make sure that you have adequately prepared and placed yourself in a setting that is going to be conducive to taking the exam. Since I keep talking about the different buttons and what it's going to look like, I gave you just a quick screenshot of what it will look like. This is just a preliminary one. This isn't exactly it, and this is also my view, so it's a little bit different from yours, but this gives you the gist of it, of what it's going to look like. So the instructions will be there, and then at the very bottom you see that blue button. For you, it will say take the quiz. For me, it says preview. So the wording there is different, but yours will look very, very similar to this, and it will be a blue button at the bottom just like that, that'll say take the quiz. That will get you started on the exam. With respect to the topics that are going to be covered on the exam, the content is from pretty much everything we have touched up to this point. So of course the textbook, there may be some questions that come from the book that weren't necessarily covered in the PowerPoints, as I assume you are all reading as we move along through this course. So the textbook is one of the primary areas from which topics or from which content will come. In addition, of course, the lectures and then any additional materials that have been provided to you. So this next section right here where it says chapter 1 through 9 topics, that's basically just a list of what the chapter, the titles of all the chapters have been, but it correlates exactly with everything that we've been talking about. So pretty much those topics from those 9 chapters are where the content on the exam is going to be pulled from. But again, the content is not limited to just what's in the lectures or just what's in the textbook. It could come from any of those places. So just make sure that you study thoroughly and that you've covered everything. And again, I think I did mention it a slide or two ago, but you can use whatever you want during the exam, as far as any notes that you have, the PowerPoints, the lectures, any study guides that you prepared, whatever the case may be. You just can't work together. You can research on the internet if you like as well. However you want to go about answering those questions is fine, as long as you're not referencing any other students, people, or any other individuals. So you have to work independently. But otherwise, whatever you want to use as far as study guides go, that's fine.